And we are live. Welcome everyone to ACDE number 175. Today, as always, we'll be talking about Denkun, get some updates on testing. I believe there was a execution API PR we wanted to discuss as well. And then figure out where we're at with regards to launching DevNet 12 and what we see as the next steps after that. And related to this, we discussed in the past that this would be the last fork on Goerli. In a world where we forked Goerli before the holidays, it would have made sense, I think, to announce that as part of the hard fork announcement. But I think if we're not going to hit that, we should still announce how long we plan to keep Goerli around for after Denkun. And so if we could get a feeling from teams today around like how long we want to maintain at least the client nodes on Goerli, that'd be great. And then to close off, Micah has a proposal for a new RPC endpoint, ETH multi-call. So I guess to start, I don't know, Perry, Barnabas, either of you want to give an update on testing so far and DevNets, where we're at there, and then we can go to the client teams as well.
Yeah, sure, I can give an update. So basically we are running DevNet 11 right now, and everything seems very stable. The only pair that is not able to keep up is Ethereum JS with Lodestar, but it seems to be some peering issue. Probably Gajinder can look into that. We wanted to launch DevNet 12 next week, but we heard some feedback from the Prism team that they think that this is a bit too soon. So we might as well hold off for a bit longer because this week is Thanksgiving week in the States, and we expect that maybe not all client teams would be ready to go with DevNet 12.
Got it. And just could you remind us, DevNet 11 does not have the latest CL changes, right? DevNet 12 is the one that will have the blob signing changes. Got it.
Yeah, that's correct. So I do have a spec sheet also for DevNet 12. Give me 1 sec. I will get the link.
I have it in the agenda. Let me post it in the chat here. Okay.
Yeah. So the only change should be just that that one change that we discussed last time.
Got it.
We did test a couple of things for the Lighthouse team. I think they changed what gets gossiped in which order, as well as quick support. And I think Pawan has like a bunch of information he's collected out there. And then we turned on MEV back in DevNet 11. So we're going through the entire MEV workflow on DevNet 11 as well.
Nice. Ben,
we should probably try out all. Sorry. So we still want to enable all MEV boost for all the different clients. Right now, it's only running for Lodestar and Nimbus, but we're going by the end of this week, we're going to enable it for all CLs.
Got it. Sorry. Anything else, Barnabas, Perry? Otherwise, I will go to Ben.
Yep, that's it for me.
Cool. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, just wondered if we should do a straw poll really on DevNet 12 starting in a week. If it's only Prism who is unable to make it, they can catch up later. So just in terms of kind of keeping up the cadence, whether if everybody else is ready or not, we could just put a finger in the air and see. Teku, we believe we shall be ready.
Awesome. Yeah. How do other clients feel about that? Is anyone else ready to start DevNet 12 next week?
Lodestar can start DevNet 12 next week as well.
Anyone else?
I think all the execution layer clients probably can.
Yeah, I assume there's no changes. I don't know if there's anyone. So Prism said they can't. I don't know if there's anyone from Nimbus or Lighthouse on the call. Okay, well, if we have all the ELs and then at least two of the CLs, potentially up to four, um, yeah, I'm curious, Perry, Barnabas, do you think there's value in standing up the DevNet even with a subset of clients? Um, it feels like we might learn about something breaking, especially given like the new CL change, by doing that next week.
I think we can do. I think we can do kurtosis test for sure, and then if we have like 3 clients, then we can start the DevNet.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. I guess what I'll do then, I'll post in the Discord asking for if there's more CLs. And we have a testing call on Monday as well scheduled. So yeah, we can bring that up there as well and see if there's a third client. But I think, yeah, let's try to do it. You know, even if it means it breaks and then there's a DevNet 13 or something, I think we'll learn a lot by trying to get the DevNet 12 up. Yeah. So okay. So cool. I'll do that. I'll ask. I'll ask in Awkward Dev, and then we can discuss this on Monday. Any other?
Would,
Oh, sorry.
would
Please go.
midweek work for Lodestar?
Sorry.
Like Wednesday or Thursday would work for Lodestar and Teku?
Yeah, I think so. The 30th was the original plan. I think that's good with Teku, possibly earlier.
Yeah, Lodestar is ready even this week as well. So yeah, we're good.
Yeah, I think Lighthouse is ready as well, so we can just try to make sure the DevNet is up before the call next week, Thursday.
Yeah, that would be amazing if we can get it up. On Wednesday, try to run it for a day and see if it's still up or broken by ACDC. Yeah.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Just ping me your branch that I should use for DevNet 12, and then I will build the images.
Awesome. Thank you. Anything else on DevNet 12? If not, Mikhail, you'd link the PR in the agenda by, sorry, I'm linking, but the PR around disallowing the invalid equivocations. This is an execution API PR. Do you want to give some context around that?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So a bit of a background. Dustin from Nimbus raised a problem in the Istanbul, and the problem looks as follows: that actually some EL clients, when they first time receive some execution payload, can validate it and return the invalid status, so saying that this payload is invalid. But if the same payload sent to the same client for a second time, the response could turn to valid, which actually, which must not happen. And yeah, obviously it must not happen. And basically it is implicit in the spec that the valid or invalid status is like the end status, and it must never change for the same payload. And because we have some clients which does not follow these implicit requirements, we decided to make them explicit and raise awareness that this thing should be fixed, because on the CL side, this is really unexpected behavior, and I guess that for other reasons, and not only for CL side, like receiving something, then that will be changed in the future. For other reasons, this is also the behavior that CL clients should not have. Yeah, Dustin, do you want to give more context from CL side? What bad things can happen because of that?
Yeah, sure. So the main issue from the CL side is that it is defined in spec a valid block cannot be the descendant of an invalid block, and an invalid block cannot contain, again, per spec on the CL side, an execution payload declared to be invalid by NEL. So what this means is that it is valid and legal and actually a quite common optimization. For example, for gossip rejection and things like this, for a CL, you say, oh no, the EL already told me that this execution payload was invalid. Anything I see that refers to that, just skip and discard and move on. And what this means is that this stalls chain progress for the CL. Now, different CLs do handle the details of this differently. CLs can try, some do, some are more strict about just saying, no, they saw it once and just stop and never use it again. At least in the past, I believe that some have saved the rejection to disk in some format, but I think they stopped doing that a while ago. So most restarting will wipe the slate clean on this point. But that's essentially, though, is that it really cuts off the validity of the chain, and that's the harm that it causes. And to the degree that some CLs seem to tolerate it, that's because like they're just retrying, and honestly, it's not clear to me whether they should.
Yeah, so basically, if some payload is deemed invalid, and this is actually an incorrect status of this payload, it may also cause temporal network splits because validators will not vote for invalid blocks, for blocks containing invalid payloads. So this is quite important to fix these bugs if they exist in EL clients. Yeah, so
is
I
this,
think that, yeah.
sorry, just to understand, is this an issue where the spec on the execution API is currently more permissive than the spec on the consensus layers, and therefore we only need to fix the spec? Or have we seen actual cases of this happen on like a DevNet? Like, I guess I'm trying to understand what leads an EL to first classify something as invalid and then valid, and if we've seen examples of that, or is this just, yeah, a spec issue that we want to make sure everybody's following?
Both are happening.
Okay.
So first is the case that this is, and in the link spec that or issue PR that Mikhail links, actually the very first link within that description is to the optimistic sync spec, and the optimistic sync spec already essentially requires this. I mean, I think explicitly, if people want to debate that, that's fine. But as far as I'm concerned, this is basically just implementing what's already in CL specs in the engine APIs. So, and for various reasons, I guess the engine APIs had not strictly required this, and what had happened was there's, let's say, some evidence that engine API implementers on the EL side have not always looked at, nor should they have to, if the specs are well factored out, pure CL specs, which is to say the optimistic sync spec.
Got it.
Which is how the network operates. So they did not necessarily see the dire outcomes of this equivocation necessarily, because the EL spec doesn't clarify this. That's part of this. That's half your question. Now, the other part is this essentially theoretical, or is this just sort of a spec alignment for the sake of spec alignment? And no, it's motivated. There are multiple ELs. This is very clear. I'm not picking on one EL here. I have encountered this with multiple ELs where they, and there are open GitHub issues and Discord threads in the ETH R&D Discord where the latter are theoretically public, kind of hard to find just because, Discord UX, but, where I have discussed this with said ELs and provided examples from their logs and compared from these devnets. Yes, because that's actually a great way to harvest these things, because then I can log in and see the exact same network situation with, Nimbus, get Nimbus Nethermind, Nimbus Besu, Nimbus Aragon, and just compare them and how they react to each payload. And beyond just looking at the like beacon chain instances. So yeah, and there are absolute examples of this, and in the DevNet up to DevNet 10 or 11. So it's become less common, sure, but I think almost the fact that it was it has continued kind of at albeit a lower frequency these days than it used to, is part of what suggested to me that maybe it's an issue of, well, it should be in the specs because it's clearly not, because look, Hive tests many things. Just this is I don't mean to make this a digression that will last longer than a sentence or two, but it's going to feed directly back into this. Hive tests many things, and empirically ELs are quite responsive to when Hive finds issues with them, because Hive tests EL specs. And what would this, I was reading out of this, was that this was one of those like regressions that was never really tested for, therefore it kept happening again and again, because it was not one of the metrics people were trying to hit. And so my goal is essentially to add this explicitly back into one of the constraints about how ELs work, as ELs see it when they implement their own code, not just when they happen to look over, you know, and into CL specs.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah, that's really helpful context. And then there's a comment in the chat by Gary saying, you know, one case where this could happen is if you have a state root mismatch and then you restart your node and it turns out fine, and then you're processing the same payload. But yeah, I guess I'm curious to hear from EL folks. Like, first, does anyone think we should not do this change? And then two, how should we test for it? Because something like this, where it's like a state root mismatch and you have to reset, is there a way to test for that in Hive or somewhere else so that we can catch those bugs earlier in the process?
Here I want to seek some clarification on behalf of Ethereum.js. So is the oscillation, so the problem is the oscillation between valid and invalid, or between invalid and syncing as well? I mean, it could happen that the node would not keep the cache of invalid blocks, or would clear out its cache at some point, and might, if the CL again is trying for an invalid block, which it should not, but let's say because of their syncing strategy, they're trying again to sync a block, and that is responded as syncing. I think this is also being mentioned in the PR, but I want to sort of confirm that, is this also sort of a no-go?
Not as unambiguously. So this is discussed in the issue linked, the PR, and between Mikhail and I, actually, as far as, and obviously other people's input, yours, anyone else's is welcome. So strictly speaking, for compatibility with the CL specs optimistic sync, which is sort of the reference I'm going with here, because that's how CLs work. This is, all the CLs implement this. And so an EL which breaks this sort of contract really makes things difficult. But the only thing that strictly requires is exactly what you said at first, which is it cannot cycle between invalid or invalidated, obviously block cache, etc., and valid. The syncing is okay for this purpose. There is a question, it's a good question, I think, what the correct thing to do about the syncing is, because what you describe, of course, is, you know, true, that as far as keeping pre-states around and all that. It, strictly speaking, though, is a little bit distinct from this issue, and you know, and that's one of the questions actually that I think we would love, Mikhail and I would, I think, welcome input into how to incorporate that or not into this PR.
I think that previously we decided that invalid syncing is probably fine, but valid syncing is not fine. And also invalid and valid switching between the two is basically something that must never happen. And as it's been said that one of the easy ways to fix that could be, say we have a cache for invalid blocks, and when the next new pilot comes with the same block hash, so we can pick the value, hit this cache and see if the block is invalid and respond invalid. Even though this cache makes sense for other reasons, but I would like to emphasize that this easy fix for this particular problem should not be, applied, because really jumping from invalid to a valid state can be quite detrimental, depending on the share of the market of whether it's market that a certain client that do this has. So yeah, this has been said. Chain splits. That's some CL clients will have to be manually restarted to accept the block that was deemed invalid incorrectly.
Thanks. Lucas?
Change discussed here. Things I want to add. That one, I think those are mainly bugs, right? So, and they're unexpected bugs. So bugs that something got corrupted, either like corrupted and stored, but that's a bigger bug, or corrupted like in memory. Like you have something and restart fixes it, for example. This is especially the case for state root mismatch. And they are unexpected bugs. We don't expect this to happen, but they are there sometimes. So I think it would be hard to test for it because the scenarios can be really, really wild. And the other thing, I think this is mostly a social problem that we need to just treat those bugs with high priority and try to fix them and communicate them well between CLs and ELs if this happens. So that's kind of the thing. I don't think there's much of like changes in but it's that we should make sure this communication goes well and.
Got it. And to be clear, I assume this means you're in favor of like making this explicit in the spec and then treating any issues we see that break this as basically a consensus issue in terms of severity or potential consensus issue. There's a +1 from this from Teku. Any other EL team have thoughts on this or how to approach it to make sure that ideally we don't hit this, but then also that we document or test it? Okay, and yeah, so there's a comment by Gajinder around basically a +1 in yet as long as we can still have invalid going back to syncing. So maybe we can give a couple more days on the PR, but assuming nothing else comes up, it seems like making it explicit that you can never go from invalid to valid as part of the spec. I don't know if we want to explicitly call out invalid to syncing. And then for now, unless the testing team comes up with a really unique way to test this, we probably can't add more tests because of how hard it is to create this bug. But if we do see this on DevNets or somewhere else, clients should fix this with like really high priority, given it can affect what a validator attests to on mainnet. Does that make sense to everyone?
Sure. I have a question actually, so as a wrapping up question in terms of how to phrase this would EL implementers, is the preference for kind of enumerate all cases or very specifically address the cases which change, which is to say, I specifically have in mind things like the invalid syncing thing here. So if this PR functionally would not change anything with invalid syncing, like it says it can happen now, it can happen after, it's fine. Is the preference to say so explicitly or to leave it out and then have that inferred? And yeah.
Any thoughts from EL folks? Okay, there's one comment saying it's good to have everything explicitly in the spec. Okay, another comment in favor of being explicit. Oh, sorry, Mikael?
Yeah, I just want to say that we'll work on the exact statement, how to spec this out. Taking into account that invalid syncing is fine, jumping between these two. Yep, and we'll just then publish it on some of the channels that it is ready for review.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you both for bringing this up. Anything else on this? Okay, so next up, I guess I wanted to bring up Gordy. So originally, I think we thought we would upgrade Gordy to Denkun before the holidays. Obviously, with the CL spec change, that's pushed things back a bit. So I think, realistically, if we wanted to upgrade Gordy before the holidays, the latest we could do that is on December 20th, which means in like 1 or 2 weeks, we need client releases out to do this. My feeling at this point is this is unlikely, unless, I don't know, if client teams disagree with that, maybe now's a good time to voice it. And okay, if that's the case, so if we're feeling like it's really unlikely that we do get Gordy fork ready to go out in the next week or two, I think we should have a proper announcement about Gordy being shut down. So we've already said it was deprecated, but just to clearly announce to people, when is the network literally gonna go off? And obviously, anyone can validate on Gordy, so it's not a call that like client teams make on their own, but client teams do run the vast majority of the validators on the network. So the day that all the client teams decide to shut their validators down, at the very least, it's going to cause a lot of instability on the network, and it's unclear how many other entities or orgs will keep running validators long term there. So I was curious to get a feeling from teams around, how long should we keep running teams validators on Gordy once it's upgraded to Denkun? I talked with a couple people ad hoc this week, and the rough number that I got was maybe something like 3 months, and then potentially we do like 1 month where we start doing slowly shutting down validators to maybe do some controlled chaos testing or stuff like that. But yeah, curious how people feel about that. So there's two comments in the chat saying until we fork mainnet, which would probably be less than 3 months. It'd be closer on the order of like 1 to 2 months. If that's the case, then I think that raises, if no one wants to run the nodes for like 3 months after the fork, I think that raises the urgency as well that we should announce this, because it might be effectively like 3 months from now or something. So anyone, I guess, yeah, does anyone think we should do longer than after the mainnet fork happens? Because there's a couple comments in the chat about that.
We know how many infrastructure providers are still using Goerli as
A
a
lot.
primary? Yeah, that would be the primary concern, I think, is that we want to give them the controlled chaos option, I think.
Yeah, my personal feeling is like mainnet is like maybe a bit close. It's, obviously, we don't know when we're going to fork mainnet, but if it happens like a month and a half after Gordy, that feels a bit short, but it's maybe the shortest possible we can do. Um, I think there
My
are.
main,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, my main argument against announcing until we merge mainnet is that there's no date for mainnet. I would prefer just a static girly fork plus 3 months, something like that. It's easier to communicate and it's
Right.
easier for people to, and that can by default mean that mainnet is already merged at that point. Sorry, already forked.
Yeah. Gary, I think so. Perry, I think, is arguing we should gate the Gordy shutdown on the Gordy fork date, but then there's some comments saying we should gate it on the mainnet fork date. One thing that's nice.
Yeah,
Sorry, go
I
ahead.
would necessarily set date based on the Girdley fork, because if something very happens during the Girdley fork, then maybe it's going to take more than sessions to get it fixed before we can even fork Sepolia. Or maybe if we push out a fix on Girdley, it might take weeks or months. So
Right.
I think we should assume that everyone is going to run their validators, at least the client teams, until we hit mainnet, plus a few weeks here and there.
Yeah, there's a comment by Ansgar saying maybe we do the later of Gordy plus 3 months or mainnet plus 1 month. I kind of like that. It'll be a weirder thing to explain in the blog post, but I think it's probably the soundest approach. Yeah, does anyone disagree with that? And then, yeah, there's another comment also in the chat around, didn't we fork Sepolia first last time? But we agreed to fork Gordy first this time because it's end of life. So if we break it, it's less bad. Whereas Sepolia, we want to keep around for a longer time. So yeah, does anyone disagree strongly with Gordy plus 3 months or mainnet plus 1 month, whatever happens the latest? And obviously, in a case where we have something break on Gordy so badly that it takes us 3 months to fix, we can also write another blog post, saying we're going to extend things. But that feels unlikely. Okay, I'll take this as a yes. And then the other question I had, so once we hit that point, are there any specific tests or anything we'd want to run or ways we'd want to handle shutting down the client validators that, I don't know, give us more valuable data? Like the obvious thing is just triggering inactivity leaks, but is there a period of time over which we'd want to run some tests in like a more chaotic mode on Gordy? And should we pre-announce that some way? So saying, after 3 months, it's going to move to like this chaos testing period for a month, and then we'll shut everything off. Does anyone have strong opinions on that?
Perhaps we can just use the time point where we said we're stopping support for Girly as the time point where the chaos stuff starts.
Yeah.
We can do chaos for roughly a month.
Yeah.
And I would advocate for everyone then doing honest exits so that whoever's left over can just continue validating until they feel like it.
Yeah. And a month feels sufficient. I assume a month gives us enough time to try out any flow or thing we'd want to try out.
Yeah, I would say so. I can't imagine too many things that we want to try.
Okay. And there's a question, how long will the exit take? Months.
Should people who are exiting continue to be good citizens and validate until they successfully exit?
I think we could just do a mass slashing. That would be a lot more fun and a lot more quick.
It's not quicker.
Oh, they would still need to exit, right?
Yeah, they would still
That's
need
right.
to. I would actually just make the case that it's per validator basis. So if you decide to be good, you can keep it up. If you don't, then network's dead anyway.
Okay. So I think overall this makes sense. So 3 months after Gordy or 1 month after mainnet, whatever comes the latest, then we have 1 month where we do some testing, and then we assume, at least from the point of view of client teams and EF DevOps, it's no longer maintained or supported, but obviously anyone can choose to run their validators on Gordy if they want. And then the other thing is we won't have it as like a canonical test net for the future hard forks. So after this fork, it'll start being out of sync with mainnet. POTUS?
Half joking, but if it's really an issue for DevOps, we can always hardcode a higher exit churn on Gurley.
I actually don't hate that.
So meaning that you changed, does Gordy has specific configs basically that are different from?
We can hardcode more validators exits per block.
I know on the EL we never wanted to do changes that were just like only applied on testnets, but if you're all fine doing that on the CL side.
Isn't it just a spec value though?
Yeah.
So, and I assume this has to go live with the hard fork though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I don't know if somebody can I assume this is like a literal one-line PR where you change the number. If somebody can make that PR and then just post it on the agenda for ACDC next week, I think it'd be good to get like a proper consensus layer discussion on it. And it might be a good idea to do it. But we should decide soon. So I think if we can get a PR for this in the next couple of days, and then confirm it on ACDC. But I think for everything else, and I guess if anyone has objections to any of this on ACDC next week as well, we can bring it up. But I'll draft the announcement following everything we discussed today, but I won't publish it until the call next week.
But this is not yet implemented in any of the clients, right? POTUS? This is not
officially I was just joking, but every client implements. We take a file with the spec constants, so we just need to change the spec constants, the presets that we're saving for each net.
And I guess are the presets network specific, or is there just minimal and mainnet? I thought there were two, but is it one per testnet?
So they are minimal mainnet. However, you can just load anything. The fork ID is one of the values. So this is something that we can just change on two networks repo.
Okay, so they're config values, not preset values. Got it.
Yeah, so both of them. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think if we want to make this change on the CL and it's easy and teams like it, then we can discuss it. But we should probably make that decision on the CL call next week. And I assume it's a small enough change that if we decided to do it, it wouldn't delay anything. Okay. Sweet. So let's do that. And then hopefully by the end of next week, we can post an announcement about Gordy just to, to let people know. Anything else on that? Okay. In that case, last thing we had on the agenda was a proposal by Micah, or not by Micah, but advertised by Micah for ETH multi-call. Do you want to give some background on this?
Sure. So the short version of ETH multi-call is basically the same as ETH call, except for you can do multiple transactions in a row that are applied in sequence on top of a shared state. And so you can, the simple example of this is very commonly you need to do an ERC20 approval followed by an ERC20 transfer. And you can queue up both of them basically and simulate both of them against, head of mainnet, for example, and see what the outcome is. Whereas right now you can't do that. You have to do the approval, get it onto mainnet, and then do the ETH call afterwards, unless you use specialized tooling. This has come up in multiple times. So a long time ago, I wrote a plugin for Nethermind that I use that does this. Hardhat and Anvil have similar features called mainnet forking and whatnot. Sina from the Geth team wrote a proposal up in the execution APIs a while back, and then another team built off of his proposal and had another proposal. And so this keeps coming up that people want this, and so we finally got together, and Nethermind and Geth have implemented the spec that we have for this. And currently we have tests, and we're basically just fixing miscellaneous bugs and resolving differences between clients. And so we're not quite to the point where we can't make changes to the spec anymore, and so we wanted to run it by the core devs and see if anyone has feedback, and before we lock in the spec and actually put it out and release clients. And so again, this is currently implemented, Nethermind and Geth. We'd love to get it implemented in Aragon and Besu as well. The spec is linked in the chat by Tim there. The big differences between ETH call and this is, besides just the ability to do multiple calls in a row, is the JSON RPC method is named ETH_multicall v1, and so the purpose of this is, of course, versioning, because we've run into problems before where we need to make a small change or something that's backwards incompatible to a JSON RPC endpoint. And so we added the v1 there, and this is something that maybe is a little bit controversial. People have other ideas. We talked a lot about various ways to do versioning of JSON RPC. We don't necessarily have to do it this way. This is the way we all decided was the best, but it's open for discussion. We also added in here ETH transfers now show up as ERC20 logs from address 0. This is because people who are doing accounting on-chain, it's very frustrating to have ERC20s, and so we felt like this is a good place we can kind of test this out, and this idea of having ETH transfers show up within a transaction as logs. And this is, there's a config flag in your JSON RPC request where you can enable or disable this. So if we don't want, I think it's off by default, so we don't confuse users who aren't used to receiving ETH transfers in their logs. It also allows for block override. So because you can do multiple calls, we also have the concept of these calls are inside of blocks that you can control. So you can set things like the timestamp on the block, the block author, basically any field on the block you can set. This is particularly useful for things where you want to maybe simulate what happens if I vote for this proposal, and then 3 weeks later, I want to see what happens when that proposal is actually executed for like governance contracts and whatnot. And so the idea is that by overriding the block, you can set the timestamp of the next block to be 2 weeks in the future or whatever, and then your EVM is going to execute as if it's 2 weeks in the future. So this allows you to do better simulation of things like that. It has state overrides. State overrides, I believe, already exist in ETH call for several clients, so that shouldn't be anything new there, really. It also does allow precompile overrides, though, so you can replace a precompile with some EVM code. This is particularly useful for EC Recover because it makes it so you can simulate what happens if you did have an accurate signature for a thing. You can see how the execution would flow. And so you can override the EC Recover precompile with some code that just like always returns success or whatever. And it's very powerful because it allows you to do things like simulate permit to or permit in ERC20 contracts. It also ignores the normal validation of no calls from contracts, and I believe ETH call does this as well, so I don't think this is new, but this is important because a few hard forks ago we disabled the ability to do calls from contracts, and this makes it kind of re-enables that for this ETH multi-call context only, not, of course, not for execution on mainnet. This allows you to, do the simulation of governance contracts, time lock contracts, stuff like that. And the last thing that's a notable difference is we have two different modes. One is validation on, one is validation off. Validation off basically just keeps the client's current ETH call validation semantics. So whatever your client does for validation, keep doing that. Whereas the validation on, that serves two purposes. One, it's standardized across clients. So ETH call currently, the clients all validate different amounts of things in different ways. Like I think, for example, Nethermind just completely ignores your ETH balance and allows you to go negative effectively in terms of gas spending. Whereas I believe Geth does not allow you to go negative in the layer. And so you get these weird little idiosyncrasies between clients with ETH call. And so we're trying to use this ETH multi-call as an opportunity to try to standardize that. And so this validation mode allows us to do that. It also allows us to have a kind of more strict ETH call. And so when you're trying to simulate something that just before you deploy, you run it on mainnet, you want to make sure that this will actually run on mainnet ahead of time. And with ETH call previously, you could run it, but because it wasn't fully validating the transaction, you could still error on mainnet, and it was very frustrating because you'd waste gas. And so by having the validation mode on, it basically makes it so you are doing exactly like if this was on a mainnet chain, almost all the validations on. And you can look in the spec, there's a couple of things that are not validated. Of course, transaction signatures are not validated in that mode. And I believe the no calls from contracts is also not validated. The ask for the core dev team here is basically just take a look at the spec and please give us feedback. We would like to get this out into mainline on the various clients sooner rather than later so people can start using it and apps can start building on it. But we also want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to give feedback and discuss. The last thing we want is to deploy a spec that everybody, if they would have been given the opportunity, would have said, oh, wait, this is a bad idea because X or Y. And so really what we just want here is everybody to take a look at the proposed spec. And like I said, there's implementations in Geth and Nethermind if you want to fiddle around with them. You're also welcome to join us. We have a little weekly call between the various implementers and parties involved. And so if anyone wants to join, talk on there, or feel free to talk to us, Discord or Telegram or wherever, if you have any feedback. And that's it. If anyone have questions, happy to answer anything.
Thank you. Oh, Dano.
So I just barely seeing this spec. One feature that's I would find useful for some of the work I'm doing is rather than moving a precompiled call and giving it code, is the ability to say, here's a set of inputs and here's a set of outputs you're supposed to give if you get a call to this address. Is that something that there would be space for that in this specification?
We talked about different ways of handling the precompile contract. Does someone have a saxophone in the background? Oh, this was down. So we've talked about a few different ways to handle the precompile overrides. One option we talked about is just like doing EC recover, just special case where you can just override EC recover because that's the most common one we can think of. The rest of them are like math things. There's not a whole lot of reasons to redefine math in your execution. The tricky part, I think, is with what you're describing with the kind of here's some inputs, here's some outputs, is that it makes it it's actually kind of hard to get that into JSON RPC, right? So we can do kind of byte arrays. We have a mechanism for that via 0x strings. I think the other solution I would suggest for that what you're describing is someone can make a contract and even deploy it on mainnet if they wanted. And that contract can just have some state. And because we can do state overrides as well, we can give the precompiled contract in question some state. And so you can basically say, override it with my fixed input to output mapping thing. And then you just have you define in your state overrides what the input output mapping is. And so you can just literally write a mapping in. And so I think there is a way to do what you want. That being said, I'm definitely happy to talk more about this, and if you have other ideas on how we can get this in, I'm not against what you're describing. I do think what we have could satisfy your needs. It just might not be quite as simple as what you're describing.
Okay, because I mean, thinking of using this for like L2s. Let's say there's a system contract call to get like L2, L1 bridge and all sorts of stuff that may not be reflected in Ethereum state. So I guess I'll call in the call and I'll put up a proposal. I don't think it would be an array of byte arrays. I think it'd be an array of structs where we have input and response. But yeah, I'll definitely call in and workshop this because I think there's a huge market for here's a magic value, here's a magic output, and it's completely external to the EVM, what those are, and it's not necessarily like derivable from the call values.
Yeah, I definitely think we can make something like that work. I don't know what the exact design is going to look like, but if you reach out to me or any of the other people mentioned in the PR, or just comment on the PR, we can definitely have a discussion. I think it's definitely possible to do what you're looking for, regardless of how we do it.
When are these calls?
Currently, they are Monday, I think Monday morning UTC. Right, I don't know the UTC time, checking real quick. Monday around 13 o'clock UTC is when we currently have them. And we're also all available on various messaging platforms if you want to talk there.
And where's the website with this information? Is it in the log somewhere?
Yeah, I'd say if you scroll up a little bit in chat here, Tim posted the spec PR. That's the. I don't think we actually link to the calls in there, but we can do that. And if you feel free to just drop a message to remind us in case we forget.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a link to a call in the spec PR. I'm looking at that.
Yeah, I don't think it's in there yet. So either message me on Discord after, and I can get you invited. We actually talked about this just before the meeting about making the calls a little more public. Previously, they're kind of invite only between the teams implementing, and so we do have plans on getting that link out there. And if you just subscribe to that PR, it will almost certainly show up on it before Monday, I hope. There you go. Oleg just posted a link to the calendar invite. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts? Sounds like not. Okay, so just please reach out to us if you have any thoughts or feedback. If we don't hear anything from anybody, then we'll probably move forward with getting this merged into mainline Geth and Nethermind once all our inconsistencies between clients are worked out. We're pretty close unless we get feedback from someone. So please reach out and read the spec when you get a chance.
Thank you. Before we wrap up, so in the chat, there were some more discussion around this idea that POTA's brought up, and I think we've landed on a consensus that it's a bad idea and we should not do it. So instead, simply keeping Gordy configs and presets as is, keeping the like Gordy plus 3 months, mainnet plus 1 month, and then some chaos testing, but not trying to mess with like the amount of validators that can be exited from Gordy per epoch. So I just want to call that out one last time. If anyone feels strongly we should change those config on Gordy, otherwise I think we can just call it a day and move forward with the same plan, but no proposed changes for Gordy. So last chance if someone wants to make the case for it. Okay, doesn't seem like it. So this is everything we had on the agenda. Was there anything else anyone wanted to bring up before we wrap up? Okay, then yeah, thank you all for hopping on, and we'll see some of you on Monday's testing call, and then most of you on ACDC next Thursday. Yeah, have a good day, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.
Yo, bye-bye.